Everyone, I hope that you are doing well. We are going through 4th edition as though it was just released. I've been making my way through the player's handbook, chapter by chapter, section by section, spending a little more time in some areas than in others, trying to look into all the different things that might be new to someone who's coming from a prior edition of Dungeons & Dragons, or make sure I want to highlight things for someone who's new to Dungeons & Dragons entirely, some of the things that might be a little trickier for them to pick up. So that's what we're doing here, and we have worked our way now to chapter 7, which covers equipment. In this video, I'm going to focus on the mundane equipment, and then I will spend another video talking specifically about magic items because they have a lot of nuance to them that I want to make sure we have a good amount of time to spend on that. So if you like these videos, please do subscribe to the channel, and if you want to make a donation to show your support, please check out down in the description. There is a link to Ko-fi where you can go on there and make a donation, one-time donation. If you're interested in doing that sort of thing, I would really appreciate it. So let's go ahead and look at this chapter. Again, this is chapter 7, and this chapter is split into 4 different parts, and it covers armor, weapons, gear, and then the magic items. And as I said, I'm going to focus on those first 3 sections, talking about the mundane items right now, and then I will cover magic items in a different video because they do deserve some special attention. And equipment is basically anything that an adventurer is going to carry with them to help them during the campaign. You get 100 gold pieces to start, and you can use that 100 gold pieces to purchase pretty much anything that you want. If you're going to try to purchase any magic, I think there are a couple magic things you could probably get for less than 100, but you'd be sacrificing a lot of other equipment if you wanted to do that. But you probably want to check with your DM to make sure that they're okay with you purchasing any magic items before you do that. Mostly you're going to spend that gold on mundane items, but they still can get expensive very quickly if you're not being careful. So, but remember, whatever you can't buy right away, you can certainly try to purchase as you collect gold and other valuables during your adventuring. You can cash those in and then spend those in stores when you get into a town that might have a store that sells certain things. Or you might find some things while you're adventuring and you're looting the bodies or exploring a room after an encounter, and maybe you find something that's actually of value there. So you can come into possession of this equipment in any number of ways during a campaign. The first thing I want to look at here is the coins and currency. They've got a table here that breaks it down. Now, if you're coming from a prior edition of the game, none of this is going to be too much of a surprise because this is the same layout that you would have in prior editions of the game. It's really a metric type system. Gold pieces are going to be the standard currency that's used for most things, but there are you also have copper and silver and platinum, and here you have astral diamonds is another currency. So and you're going to have 10 coppers to a silver, 10 silvers to a gold, and on up the line. And then you can see that there's a weight here that indicates that 1 pound for every 50 coins is what you're looking at. And we'll talk a little bit about what the weight on things comes into play a little bit later on here when we get into this. So, but that's how the coins work. And then the first section here is really talking about the armor. And if you remember from when you were looking at the classes, every single class had different armor and weapon proficiencies. So depending on what class you chose, you were proficient in different types of armor. And this is where that comes into play, because as you're shopping for your armor, you're going to want to make sure that you choose armor that you are proficient with, because if you don't, then you're going to take some penalties. So in particular, you would take, if you have armor that you're wearing that you are not proficient in, you're going to have a -2 penalty on your attack rolls and also to your reflex defense. So you would still get the bonus for your armor class, but then you would have a penalty on your reflex defense, and you would also get a -2 penalty every time you make an attack while you're wearing that armor. So really kind of important that you choose armor that you are proficient with and don't try to use something else. There's also then 2 types of armor, in the sense that there's light armor and heavy armor. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then you have categories such as cloth and leather and hide and chain and plate. That might be all of them. Scale is the other one. And then you also have shields. So that's kind of the different groupings. It's important to note about the light and the heavy armor is that if you are wearing light armor, then you get to add the armor bonus to your armor class, And then you also get to add the higher of either your dexterity modifier or your intelligence modifier. So if we just kind of flip ahead here and say, so like you can see it says that these are all light armor, and then you get into the heavy armors down here. So if you're wearing any of these armors, which are light, let's say that you're wearing hide armor, and it gives you a +3 to your armor bonus as your armor bonus. So that's going to give a +3 to your armor class. And then because it's light armor, you would also get to add either your dexterity modifier or your intelligence modifier, whichever is higher. So let's say that you had a +3 dexterity modifier, you would get to add that +3 in addition to this +3 that you get for the hide, giving you a total of +6 for wearing this hide armor. If you're wearing heavy armor, you don't get to add that intelligence or dexterity modifier. You only get whatever the armor bonus is, but you'll notice those armor bonuses are a lot higher, so you don't necessarily need those added there. I'm going to skip over the enhancement bonus for a second. The other thing to keep in mind when you're shopping for your armor is that there's this check and this speed. Lots of these at the lower end, they don't have anything there, which means you don't have to worry about it. But then as you start getting into the heavier and heavier armor, you start getting a check penalty. And what that is if you looked at your skills, you would see there's a place on the character sheet where it has a place to put a penalty. So like if you're doing an acrobatics check, and you're wearing hide armor, you're actually going to take a -1 penalty to that check. So certain skills, you have a penalty if you try to complete that skill while wearing this armor. So you need to keep in mind that can be important. And then a similar thing with speed. Naturally, some armor is going to be harder to move around in, so it's going to slow you down. And especially as you get into these heavies, you know, if you're wearing plate armor, it's going to slow you down, and you're going to take a -1 to your speed. So something else to keep in mind. You know, don't just look at this armor bonus and say, "Oh, cool! I want to spend all this money. I'm going to get plate armor and get my +8 bonus." You are going to take a -2 penalty to some of your skill checks, and you're going to take a -1 penalty to your speed. So that's kind of important. You're also going to spend 50 gold for it, and since you only had 100 to start with, that's going to be, you know, half of your money that you're going to spend on that. And that might be great if you are a fighter or a paladin or something where you really want to have that. That might be where you want to invest some of your money, but not always. So be mindful of that. And then we get to the weight. Remember when we talked about the coins, it took like 50 coins to equal 1 pound. Here, some of this armor gets pretty heavy. Plate armor is going to weigh 50 pounds. The scale armor is going to be 45 pounds. On the lighter end, the cloth armor is only going to be 4 or 5 pounds. I'll talk about the encumbrance thing a little later, but again, you'll want to pay attention to that. The one that I skipped over here that I do want to talk a little bit about for the armor, because this one can be a little tricky, and I'll ask anybody to, if I get it wrong, please let me know in the comments what I got wrong here. But the bottom line is that, so you get a bonus with your armor, and that's what your bonus is to armor class. What this minimum enhancement bonus is talking about what the bonus would have to be if you were trying to make this a magic item. So if we look at worm scale armor as an example, so it's a +10, and it says the minimum enhancement bonus is a +4. And what that's saying is that if you were going to get magic worm scale armor, you couldn't have a +1 magic worm scale armor or a +2 magic worm scale armor. The minimum magic enhancement that you could get on this armor would be a +4. So just to peek ahead at the magic items, and we can see there's a whole section with armor, but you'll notice that there's this magic armor box here that tells you the different levels of enhancement that you have, and you've got +1, +2, +3, and then here's +4. So what this is basically saying here when we look at this worm scale armor is that you can, in order for this to be a magical armor, to get magical worm scale armor, you would have to get that +4 level. You could not use the +1 and say, oh, for 360 gold, I could get +1 worm scale armor. No, you couldn't do that. The worm scale armor would not work as magic armor unless it had at least a +4 enhancement bonus on it, which is obviously much more expensive to get, which would be much harder to find. So that's what that translates to. If anybody's watching and they have a different interpretation of what that is, then let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say. So that's basically the armor. So you there's a lot of stuff to take in there as you're trying to decide what your armor is. You got to think about your cost. You got to think about what penalty penalties there might be. You got to think about if you're proficient with it. Do you want, if you want to stick with the light armor so that you can add your dexterity or your intelligence, lots of things to factor in as you're picking your armor. And then we get into the weapons, and I should mention that with the armor, that's a lot of stuff, but it's also very similar to somebody coming from a prior edition. Very similar types of decisions you'd have to make. Same here with weapons. There's a lot of different properties that go with the weapons and things to factor in as you're deciding what weapons you want to get. But if you're coming from a prior edition, also very similar. So someone who's coming from 3rd edition and is opening the book for 4th edition, most of this is going to be like, oh, yeah, I've seen that before. I know what they're talking about here. If you're brand new to the game, there is a lot to take in because there's a lot of nuance in what you can do. So, but looking at the weapons, again, with your class, you're going to have received some sort of weapon proficiency, and it would tell you with your class what that proficiency is going to be, which type of weapons that would be with. So you'll want to try to shop for weapons that had that sort of proficiency, or excuse me, that you were proficient in. Weapons come in essentially 2 different types. There's either melee weapons and there's ranged weapons. The melee weapons are the ones that you're going to use when you're up close and doing hand-to-hand type combat. So this is your swords and your hammers and your axes. You're right there face to face with your enemy. And then your ranged weapons are the ones that you're going to use from far away. This would be your bows, your crossbows, your slings, stuff like that. So you're further away and you're shooting some sort of ammunition towards the enemy. And then on top of that, it's broken down into simple and military. The simple ones are the more basic weapons, and the military ones are the ones that are more advanced and they're more complicated to use. So you would have to be proficient in those weapons. That's where the proficiency comes in. You might be proficient in the simple one, but you're not proficient in the military because they are complicated and it would require more training for you to learn how to use those. So let's take a look at the chart. You can see there's a lot of keywords and definitions in this section that you can refer back to as you're looking at the weapons themselves, because you see you have properties and you have the different groups, and those are all defined in other parts of this chapter. You can just kind of go through and it'll tell you some details about it. So looking at the table, you can see we've got our simple melee weapons, our military melee weapons, and then our superior melee weapons, improvised weapons, and then we got our ranged weapons: simple ranged, military ranged, superior ranged, improvised ranged. The improvised are going to be situations where you're in a bar fight and you pick something up and you throw it across the room at somebody. The dungeon master is going to use this to help determine what kind of damage that might do. Depending on what it is you picked up, that would indicate how far could you throw it and what kind of damage would it do, what would that attack look like. So that's really kind of the improvised. The superior then is just the much more advanced weapons that you would use. But what you want to look at here is, first of all, is the proficiency bonus. So if you are proficient with the weapon, then you get to add that proficiency bonus to your attacks when you use that weapon. So if you are proficient with a longsword, then you get a bonus of +3 when you make your attack roll. In addition to what the other things you add to that attack roll, you would add your +3 bonus to it as well. Then it has the damage. So the longsword is a 1d8, and this translates to that W that we would see in your basic attack, or with a power. It would tell you that the damage that you deal is going to be a 1W or a 2W or something like that. The W is referring to this right here. So for that longsword, it's a 1d8. If the damage that you deal just says 1W, then you're going to roll 1d8, and then there might be bonuses you add. The important thing to remember with this is that like a great club has a damage of 2d4, and then some of these are 2d4, and then there's like a maul that has a 2d6. So these are all still just a W. That is the weapon die damage. So if you get to a power, if you're using a maul and for a certain power, and it says that the damage is going to be a 2W, then that's going to be 4d6, because the 1W is 2d6, and so doubling that would be 2d6. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is also like with the 1W and the 2W, which is that so you don't just roll the 2d6 or the 1d8 or whatever the damage is and then double it. You roll those dice. So you would roll 2d8 and that would be your damage, and you would roll 4d6 and that would be your damage if it was like a 2W. So you don't just roll it once and then double it. Just something to keep in mind there. For range, that is going to indicate there's two numbers always that come with the range. The first number is going to be essentially the peak of the normal range. So in this case, like, well, let me go to the ranged weapons here. So like a hand crossbow, the range, the first number is a 10. What that's going to say is then anything up to 10 squares is the normal range. You can just make a ranged attack just as you normally would. There's no special modifiers you would need to apply to it. And then the next number is the maximum range. So anything beyond 20 squares is out of range for that. If an enemy is standing more than 20 squares away from you, your hand crossbow will not reach them. So you would not be able to reach them with that crossbow. So that is just out of range. The key is that anything in between the 10 and the 20, so from 11 to 20 is long range, and you're going to take a -2 penalty on your attacks with that. So if you've got like 3 enemies to choose from, one of them is 5 squares away, they're in normal range, and you don't have any sort of modifiers you would need to apply to that because that's well within the range for your hand crossbow. Another one is 12 squares away. Well, they're now in your long range, which means that you can still try to hit them, but you're going to take a -2 penalty to it. And then a third enemy is 23 squares away. They are out of range. It doesn't matter. Nothing that you can do. You're not going to hit that enemy. The crossbow just simply won't reach that far. So that's what the range numbers mean. You can see different weapons have different ones. There are some melee weapons that have ranged values on them, and those essentially translate to those are weapons you could throw if you wanted to. So you'll see that with the dagger, you'll see it with the javelin, you'll see it with the hand axe. These are all weapons that you could use in melee as a melee weapon, but you can also throw these weapons, and that's why they have a range attached to them. And obviously those ranges are much lower than they are for the actual ranged weapons. Next is the price. Again, we got to be mindful of the price for your weapons, the weight, which will come into play for encumbrance. The group comes back to, there's a whole section here that talks about the different weapon groups and describes what those different groups mean. The really important thing is the properties, because this tells you other features of this weapon. And these are really things you don't want to overlook, because if you just focus on the damage that you can deal with the weapon, then you're missing out, because there's some properties that might be associated with the different weapons that would make a difference for you. And obviously, a lot of these weapons deal 1d8. A lot of these weapons deal 1d4 or 1d6. It's the properties that are really going to distinguish one from another. A couple of them are the like high crit is nice because a critical hit will deal max damage. So in the case of, like, say, the scimitar, if you rolled a crit with the scimitar, that would be 1d. It would be 8 points of damage at a minimum, because that's the maximum that the weapon die would be. It would be an 8, then plus whatever bonuses you get. But because it has the high crit property, you get that damage, but you also get to roll the weapon die again. So you would get the 8 points just right off the bat, and then you can roll the 1d8 to get additional damage on top of that. So if you've got, some of the other weapons that have a high crit, like the great axe has a high crit property and it's a 1d12, you're going to get, on a critical hit, you're going to get 12 damage, plus you're going to get to roll the 1d12 again. And then when you get to Paragon and Epic tier, then you get to roll it even more times. So really, really good property. The versatile property means that it's a one-handed weapon, but you could use it as a two-handed weapon, and you get to deal a little bit extra damage with that. So that's nice. And then for the ranged weapons, you'll see there's the load free and load minor. Normally with a ranged weapon where you have to put some ammunition in it, it's going to take you a standard action to put that ammunition in there. So if like I'm putting a bow, an arrow in my crossbow, sorry, a crossbow would take a bolt. I'm putting an arrow in my longbow. That's going to take an action, which means I can't actually fire that longbow until my next turn. But they have these properties which indicates, so a hand crossbow has a load free, which means that it's a free action to put a bolt in my hand crossbow. It's a load free for my sling, which means it's a free action for me to put another bullet in my sling. The regular crossbow is a load minor, so it's a minor action for me to put a bolt in my regular crossbow. So that's what those mean. That can come in handy. So you definitely want to pay attention to all the different properties that are on these weapons to make sure you're getting one that does the things that you want to do. And then there's definitely information on here that talks about a little more detail on how the how to interpret all of these different things. So there's a lot to take in when your weapons. You want to make sure that you take a little time, understand what you want for your character, and that you are not just focusing on the damage that you're going to deal with the weapon, but rather all the little nuances of what that weapon's going to do and things. So just take some time and make the right decisions with it. There is a little section here talking about silvered weapons. So if you're fighting some monsters like werewolves, as you might expect, that have a resistance unless you're using a silvered weapon. So you can get a weapon silvered. It costs 500 gold to silver a weapon, or some different amount of ammunition if it's a ranged weapon. So like 20 bullets and 10 crossbow bolts and stuff like that. So you can spend money to do that. There's some rules about selling equipment. It really is up to the dungeon master on how that works. So, but that's the weapons section. Again, lots to take in there. And if you're coming from another edition of the game, it's not anything really new. This is very similar stuff to what you would have seen in prior editions. But if you are new to Dungeons and Dragons, it shows you how nuanced the game can be by taking some time and making some really good choices for this stuff. And the final mundane section in here is the adventures gear. And this is essentially anything else that you're going to have while you're out there adventuring. And for the most part, the safe choice is to just choose the standard adventurer's kit. It's relatively cheap, and it includes most of that basic stuff that you would need as you're going out on your adventures. But you can also obviously buy other stuff as well. So if you want to have more torches, or you want to have some candles, if you feel that's something that might be important, have some more rope, whatever fits for your character that you can afford, then by all means, this is where you can get it. This is the list of things, and it's got descriptions of all that stuff here. The really important thing is that there's two types of gear that you're going to find. Some of the gear is actually going to give you some kind of bonus that you can use when you're doing something, while its other gear is going to be a little more situational. So like, for example, like thieves' tools. If you were to purchase thieves' tools, this would be a good purchase for someone who is, say, a rogue, because if you're using thieves' tools, then you're going to get a +2 bonus to thievery checks to open a lock or disarm a trap. So that is a piece of gear that it will actually give you a bonus to doing something. And then, things like spell books and ritual books and stuff, those are useful because if you need to have, you usually, if you're choosing that kind of class, you will get those things. But being able to purchase those things gives you the ability to actually copy spells and rituals into those books. So they have an actual thing that you can do in the game. Other things such as, more rope, or like a blanket or a bedroll. Those are things that are more situational, where you may need to have some rope. You're doing some kind of exploration, and there's not necessarily a specific bonus that you're going to get. It's just more the fact that you have the rope will allow you to do different things in the game that are, kind of those non-combat type things that you have. So by looking through this gear and thinking about the types of things you want to be prepared for, that's where it really comes in. So some of these will give you actual bonuses. Some of them it's more situational based on the role playing and the and how you're doing in what you're doing in the campaign as far as exploration, social encounters. You can use these things to help you with some of those situations. There's some stuff in here for about, food and drink. This can come in handy if you're in a town and you're staying somewhere. That's kind of a guide for how much those things are going to cost. How much would it cost to buy a wagon or a horse? Sometimes DMs don't necessarily want people buying some of these things. So even if you could afford it, you might not want to, you might want to check with your DM, and, you may not want to spend the money on maybe a wagon with for your first level character isn't necessarily the best use of that money to start with. The last thing I want to cover here is encumbrance. And so this is, again, something from prior editions of the game and some editions of the game going back to the early editions. This was used a lot more than it has lately. Now, what I've seen is generally you're not really counting the weight of every single thing that you're carrying and really following these rules too closely. Generally, it's more kind of hey, unless you're trying to carry something that's ludicrously heavy, then the DM's just going to kind of let it go, or everybody's kind of on their honor to follow these things. But these rules do exist, and so there are circumstances where it really does come into play. If you've purchased all of your equipment and you've got all the weights for all of that equipment, they do weigh a certain amount, and so you do kind of need to take that into account, that the more stuff you're carrying, the heavier it's going to be, and that is going to impact your ability to move. So it's all based on your strength score. So if you take, if you start with your strength score and you multiply it by 10, that is the amount of weight that you can carry without any penalty. That is a normal load for you, and that's obviously going to be different for every character. And then if you double that, then that is a heavy load. And that if you're carrying a heavy load, then that's going to slow you down. And then if you're carrying 5 times then that normal load, then that is going to be your maximum drag load. You couldn't possibly move any more than that. So you can't just load yourself up with, a gazillion things and put them in your backpack and then go about your business like nothing's wrong. If you are carrying a heavy load, it's going to slow you down. And that's it's a slowed condition that you'll get. And then if you're carrying a maximum drag load, you're just not gonna be able to do it. So that is something to keep in mind. Again, depending on your table and how you're running the game, it will determine how specific they're being about this encumbrance and stuff. If you're 2 pounds over, is the DM going to say that that's a problem? Some campaigns that would be, because that's part of the campaign, is that everybody needs to be very aware of what they're carrying and factor that stuff in. So, but in other campaigns, it'll only be a problem if you're going well beyond these limits. So that's something to keep in mind there. So that is the mundane gear from the Player's Handbook. I think there's a lot of really cool stuff in this section of the book. If you're coming from a prior edition of the game, then there's a lot of similarities to what you would have had in those prior editions. So there's nothing really too shocking in this. If you're new to Dungeons and Dragons, then I highly recommend that you spend some time, look beyond the just the armor bonus that you're going to get when you choose your armor, and beyond the damage that you're going to do with a particular weapon. Look at those weapon properties, look at some of the other nuances of the different armor, weapons, and gear, because that's really where it can make a big difference in what your character can do, and make sure that you're getting the most out of what you want your character to do, especially at first level. Just be mindful that you only have 100 gold to work with, so that is a limiting factor for you. So, but I think it's a really good section. I'm excited to get into the magic items, which add a whole nother layer of complexity that we will dig into in a future video. But let me know in the comments if I missed anything, if I misrepresented anything, if you have different interpretations, if I glossed over any of the specifics that you think would be important. I'd love to hear about that in the comments so that we can all learn from everybody's experiences. If you enjoy these videos, please do subscribe to the channel. And then if you want to make a donation, I have the link to my Ko-fi down in the description if that is something that interests you as well. But that's what I have for now. Next time we will talk about probably magic items. So until next time, take care.